Well, this week saw Africa's biggest telecommunications network, MTN, join forces with Chinese equipment maker Huawei to test the fifth generation network, 5G. Could these be signs that Africa is embracing new technologies, and how does it improve your life? This idea of 5G, I barely get a 4G signal anywhere I go at the moment. Now we're talking about 5G. It's terribly exciting. For most people, it means absolutely nothing other than more expensive, faster, hopefully, and more plentiful data into the future. Does that go anywhere to solve the problems we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes?
It definitely does. Like, the broadband is one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's a task that a lot of African leaders are taking very seriously. Until recently, 1 gigabyte cost about the equivalent of 18% of an annual salary for median income in Africa. It is completely unsustainable if we are to roll out the fourth industrial revolution. Actually, a few days ago, the World Economic Forum signed a contract with Smart Africa, so a coalition of 25 countries on the continent, to roll out our Internet for All project, which is really working very closely with business and governments in addressing the issues about broadband. And I think that courageous approach to say we need to work together. No country alone can do this. Has to be the approach on a number of issues. So about keeping the ownership, whether it's about new technologies, new innovations, new research, is simply not going to fly in this world. It has to be far more collaborative, and it has to be far more shareable.
No, but that's the point. And we've had lots of talks recently about taking down some borders and getting trade flowing, and perhaps at some point in the future there's talk of a single currency, sub-Saharan Africa, all of that sort of stuff. We're happy to cooperate in the digital world because we don't see it as very real, Sia. Yeah. But on the ground, every single day, countries don't trust each other. Neighbors don't trust each other. Big criticism of South Africans not trusting other Africans. I mean, how do we ever hope to get ahead if we can't do the human basics?
Look, I think sometimes we do tend to get caught up on the negatives, right? And the negatives are really what everybody clearly can see and, is obvious. But the good stories and the individual stories aren't always published. I think there is a lot of progress that African states have made towards the, regional integration process. Whether you look at the most recently signed Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, or the signing of the Single Africa tourism market, etc. And there is an existing partnership with South African neighboring countries, a common monetary area, etc., which enables trade and investment across borders in the same currency. But a lot of these things take time. What I'm telling you about SACU and the Rand Common Monetary Area has been established since 1910. It's the oldest customs union. So these things take a lot of time. But I think what our African leaders have shown is the willingness, the political will. And I think in most cases, what we've seen globally, if you look at, the US or Europe, the central problem of the regional integration process there is the political problem. The fact that political leaders change, etc. And, the last leader might have had an idea of a unified North African free trade area, North America free trade area, but the current leader says no, we're neglecting it, building a wall, etc. But I think in as much as the world is disintegrating and pointing at each other and trade wars, etc., the African continent is following suit, obviously led by the East Asian example, towards integration. And I think our leaders now need to back that up with an economic base to back up the political will.
I mean, it's almost as if Africa's counter-cyclical. The world, sort of post-World War II, the social democratic compact is falling apart in many parts of the world, and America is becoming more isolationist, Britain breaking away from the European Union, the Europeans not wanting to give Britain a cushy deal, and the European Union itself incredibly fragile and possibly disintegrating into the future. And here in Africa, people are talking about collaboration and working together again. It's a really interesting place we find ourselves in at the stage of a fourth industrial revolution, Emery.
Very much. And I think there's a lot for other leaders outside Africa to learn of this integration. I will, however, say we're seeing a lot of new political winds of change on the continent. The most important is that they deliver to promises to their citizens. Just changing out the person, it requires much more. Yeah. And I think those political systems, we have seen it in Europe and in North America, just changing the person with a stronger rhetoric doesn't change people's inertia towards these changes, doesn't change the feeling of being left behind and not being part of this grand vision. So I think it requires leaders that are bold and courageous to also change the path, change the trajectory, have a political vision about what type of society would we like to have. Why is it that we're integrating technologies? Because some of these technologies might not make us more happy or more wealthy or more sustainable. So we need to have political visions that is across civil society, citizens, voters, and businesses.
And that's a great long-term view. See, do we have the time? There's so many ticking time bombs all over the world, and on this continent, probably the biggest time bomb is the one of expectation and failed expectations, and expectations not being met that possibly weren't realistic, or perhaps not properly executed over certainly in South Africa in the last 2.5 decades. So we've got a crisis of expectation, which is fueled by access to the world through the Fourth Industrial Revolution. There is a clash coming.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of pressure, and a lot of people would say the so-called African demographic dividend is actually a demographic disaster waiting to happen. Yes, it is without jobs. Yes, it is without promoting entrepreneurship and enabling people to create businesses for themselves. But do we have the time? Definitely not. I think policymakers need to rearrange and look at the world the way it is. I think policymakers are far too caught up in the old world of nationalism, etc. We're coming into an integrated world now. We're coming into a world of global and regional value chains. And that creates, it requires a totally different type of thinking. And that's why people laugh in the face of people, like leaders like in the US, where you want to stage a trade war with, China, the biggest producer globally. It doesn't make sense. You're living in an old world. It's a different world now.
Anne-Marie, can we skip the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, please, and simply implement the fourth in this continent? Or is it
not entirely? No. It will take massive investment in infrastructure, education, innovation, entrepreneurship, basic access to technologies, to electricity. That cannot be skipped. Absolutely not. So we are tasking African leaders with something that no one else has ever done, which is to catch up on 4 industrial revolutions. But there is no alternative. And so I think we're already seeing, and I am optimistic on some accounts as well, because I do see pockets where we see things being done quite differently. M-Pesa's massive success really came from a lack of saying, the central bank in Kenya said, we're not going to regulate. This is actually, we're going to give you a framework to disrupt, but then we're going to have oversight, and we're going to also manage the risk around it. That approach to new type of governance, being far more agile, not looking at all the input, but looking at the broader impact, if that can take hold on a more continental basis. I think we say the same with drones in Rwanda, and there are a number of other examples. Those are courageous ways of new types of governance that I think can lead us somewhere.
And we must leave it there. It's the TINA principle. There is no alternative. That is it for this week. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to our guests and for you at home for participating in tonight's discussion. You can talk to us via Twitter, the handle @ENCA, or @BruceBusiness, directly to me using the hashtag ENCA Taking Stock. You can also catch our latest episodes by subscribing to the ENCA YouTube channel. Do that. Till next time. Bye-bye.